Madam Vice President, they're wrapping me very hard here. I hope you got to say what you wanted to say about Donald Trump. There are a lot of things.
There's more to say. I have much more to say.
There are a lot of things that people want to learn about you and your policies, and that's why we invited you here.
I invite everyone to go to kamalaharris.com, and you will see that I have 80 pages of policies that are quite comprehensive and should be accessible to anyone who would like to read them. And it includes what I intend to do about affordable housing, what I intend to do about small businesses, what I do
and that's why we invited you here,
our economy,
to see where you were in 2019 and where you are now.
America's military and ensure we have the most lethal and best fighting force in the world.
Madam Vice President, and they're giving me a hard rap
Well,
here.
I thank you for the time.
I thank you for the time.
It's good to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dana, you've been on the other side. You've been on the rapper as a press secretary interviewing a president, and you know I'm talking like 4 people waving their hands, like it's got to stop. So Martha, final, I had to dismount there at the end. There's so many things, and she maybe should do more of these.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy! I gotta tell you guys. I just witnessed one of the greatest meltdowns that we've ever seen in an interview between a cable news journalist and a politician. Okay, we're talking about the Bret Baier versus Kamala Harris Fox News interview that was highly anticipated because a lot of people had questions about whether or not Bret Baier would bring the fire to Kamala Harris. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, I gotta tell you guys. He lit a fire under Kamala Harris's ass, okay? She had a full-blown meltdown, okay? I mean, at points in an interview, it looked like she wanted to get up and cry. Her team ended up rage quitting the interview at 28 minutes because Bret Baier was cooking her that hard throughout the whole interview, okay? This is not an exaggeration. This is one of the greatest meltdowns that I've ever seen, okay? So it's a long interview. I can't play the whole thing, okay? But we're going to play some of the parts of it that I think were the most important parts. And we're going to go over it because this was insanity, right? I mean, Kamala Harris she did not know how to handle the heat from Bret Baier. And he bought the heat, okay? Because throughout a vast majority of the interview, she was not answering the questions. And it started at the beginning when Bret Baier predictably talked about immigration and Kamala Harris's failure at the border. Take a look.
How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have an
it's a rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question. I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. Most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the CHIPS and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish,
You had the White House and the House and the Senate, and they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising, and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so as you guys can see, the strategy from Kamala Harris going into this interview was to essentially filibuster every question, right, with an answer that has nothing to do with the question, right? Bret Baier on multiple occasions asked her direct questions, okay? Now, these were not gotcha questions. Bret Baier was not trying to get her with gotchas, okay? I don't want people to get it twisted. That's not what he was doing. He asked her direct questions about how many illegals do you think have come into the country? She can't answer the question. He asked her about, well, why did you get rid of Remain in Mexico? Or do you regret getting rid of Remain in Mexico? Because they want you to believe that the border crisis began with Trump not going along with the bipartisan border bill that does not secure the border, right? That's what they want you to believe. But as Bret Baier pointed out numerous times throughout his interview, that's not when the crisis began. The crisis got out of control basically the first day that Joe Biden got into office, okay? And it's because of your actions, the actions of your administration. And Kamala Harris just refused. She refused to take accountability and responsibility, not only for Joe Biden's actions, okay, but also for the lives that were lost as a result of those actions. Take a look.
Instead of fixing a problem, and in this election, this is rightly a discussion that the American people want to have. And what they want are solutions, and they want a president of the United States who's not playing political games with the issue,
I hear you,
but actually is focused on fixing it.
6 Democrats voted against that bill. It would have allowed 1.8 million illegal immigrants into the country a year. A lot of conservatives had a problem with it. These are the 6 Democrats. But more importantly, back to the original premise, Jocelyn Nungari, Rachel Morin, Laken Riley, they are young women who were brutally assaulted and killed by some of the men who were released at the beginning of the administration, well before a negotiated bipartisan bill. Former President Clinton actually referred to Laken Riley Sunday campaigning for you in Georgia, saying if those men had been properly vetted, Laken Riley probably would not have been killed. So if it wouldn't have happened, this is well before any negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe
Bret,
those families an apology?
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There is no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago.
Madam Vice President, it was a policy decision in the early part of your administration. I will let one of the mothers talk about it. Take a listen.
Because of the Biden-Harris administration open border policies catch and release, they were enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program. This meant that they were released into the United States. It was not even a full 3 weeks later that they would take my daughter, Jocelyn Nungari's life. I believe the Biden-Harris administration open border policies are responsible for the death of my daughter.
That's the early days. So do you owe them an apology is what I'm saying.
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I am so sorry for her loss. Sincerely. But let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions.
And that brings me to the next part of the interview, in which, again, you can see here, Kamala Harris clearly not trying to answer any questions, but Bret Baier moved on from immigration and the border, and he asked her about some of her past policy positions that she has taken, okay, when she was running as a Democrat in 2019, and her positions now, and why she has changed those positions. And, of course, she's not answering the question.
I get it.
There's a lot of people that look back at what you said in 2019 when you first ran for president. And there have been changes, and you've talked about some of them. When it comes to immigration, you supported allowing immigrants in the country illegally to apply for driver's license, to qualify for free tuition at universities, to be enrolled in free health care. Do you still support those things?
Listen, that was 5 years ago, and I'm very clear that I will follow the law. I have made that statement over and over again, and as Vice President of the United States, that's exactly what I've done, not to mention before.
If that's the case, you chose a running mate, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, who signed those very things into state law. So do you support that?
We are very clear, and I am very clear, as is Tim Walz, that we must support and enforce federal law, and that is exactly what we will do.
So decriminalizing border crossings, like you said in 2019.
I do not believe in decriminalizing border crossings, and I've not done that as vice president. I will not do that as president.
So these are evolutions that you've had.
But let's be very clear. I'm the only person who's running for president who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations.
This is a time when voters, especially here in Pennsylvania, are inundated with commercials and ads. They just want it to stop because it's every commercial. But many of them add noise, but a few of them seem to break through. This particular one from the Trump campaign has gotten a lot of attention.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
So are you still in support of using taxpayer dollars to help prison inmates or detained illegal aliens to transition to another gender?
I will follow the law, and it's a law that Donald Trump actually followed. You're probably familiar with, now it's a public report, that under Donald Trump's administration, these surgeries were available on a medical necessity basis to people in the federal prison system. And I think, frankly, that ad from the Trump campaign is a little bit of like throwing, stones when you're living in a glass house.
The Trump aides say that he never advocated for that prison policy and no gender transition surgeries
you know what, you got to take responsible for what happened
presidency.
in your administration.
Yeah, no surgeries happened in this presidency.
It's in
so
black and white.
Would you still advocate for using taxpayer dollars for gender reassignment surgeries?
I will follow the law, just as I think Donald Trump would say he did.
You would have a say as president.
Like I said, I think he spent $20 million on those ads, trying to create a sense of fear in the voters.
Yeah, so the clear strategy here from Kamala Harris going into this interview was to filibuster every single question that Bret Baier asked with an answer that's not relevant to the actual question, okay? She was going to filibuster with her talking points and butt Trump, right? That's essentially what the whole interview was, and Bret Baier wasn't having it, right? He was basically trying to get an actual answer from Kamala Harris to the questions that he was asking. And at points, Kamala Harris was rambling so much that Bret Baier admitted that I really don't know what you're talking about, right? When Kamala Harris tried to basically explain what she was talking about because she's not making any fucking sense, okay? And again, this is why I'm saying it this way, because this interview was very frustrating to watch. It was very entertaining, but it was very frustrating because you could just tell that the strategy here was just to run out the clock. Just run out the clock with talking points. Don't answer any real questions. Don't have a real conversation. Just run out the clock. And again, it just resulted in moments like this. Take a look.
It's interesting you said turn the page, Madam Vice President. You were asked on 2 different shows last week what, if anything, you would do differently than President Biden. Here's what you said.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Under a Harris administration, what would the major changes be, and what would stay the same?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm obviously not Joe Biden.
I know.
And so that would be one change in terms of, but also I think it's important to say with, 28 days to go, I'm not Donald Trump.
So you're not Joe Biden, you're not Donald Trump, but nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership. That is about turning the page on rhetoric that people are frankly exhausted of, Bret.
More than 70% of people tell the country is on the wrong track. They say the country is on the wrong track. If it's on the wrong track, that track follows 3.5 years of you being vice president and President Biden being president. That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam
You
Vice
and I
President.
both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade,
But
people
you're the
have
lever of
become,
power.
but Listen, an enemy within, talking about the American people, suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Bret, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
well, he was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you,
that was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy.
Yeah, so you can see that Kamala Harris is getting extremely frustrated, okay? Because Bret Baier is not giving her a softball interview, right? He's not just letting her get away with Trump derangement and BS, okay? But she doubles and triples down throughout this whole interview on wanting to talk about nothing but Trump. She doesn't want to answer any question. She just wants to talk about Trump and just be Trump deranged the whole time, okay? And it was at the point where she was talking about Trump being unwell, right? Mentally unstable. This is what she was saying, okay? She was speaking about Trump's mental faculties, okay? So Bret Baier basically turns it back around on her and says, okay, you're talking about Trump and his mental faculties. What about Joe Biden? And the fact that you were vice president and Joe Biden clearly is mentally struggling, mentally deteriorating. This is why he dropped out of the race. Part of the reason why he dropped out of the race. At what point did you notice that he was mentally declining? And Kamala Harris loses it once again and just goes into another Trump deranged meltdown and refuses to actually engage with the real question, to answer the question, because she can't answer the question. All she knows is but Trump. That's all she can do.
You call Donald Trump he's misguided. You say now
he's unstable. He is unstable, Bret.
He's not well. You say he's mentally not stable.
He's not stable.
Let me ask you this. You told many interviewers that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden, I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room. And he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
There were no concerns raised?
Bret, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
I understand.
And
but
Donald Trump
but
is.
You talked about it.
And Donald Trump
after George Clooney said within a few minutes of talking to President Biden at a fundraiser that he thought this was not the same Joe Biden that we saw on the debate stage.
Donald Trump is on the ballot.
I understand. You met with him at least once a week for 3.5 years. You didn't have any concerns?
I think the American people have a concern about Donald Trump, which is why the people who know him best, including leaders of our national security community, have all spoken out. Even people who worked for him in the Oval Office, worked with him in the Situation Room, and have said he is unfit and dangerous and should never be president of the United States again, including his former vice president, which is why the job was open for him to choose another running mate. So that is a fact. That is a fact.
Yeah, so eventually, Kamala Harris's team ends up rage quitting the interview, okay? As you guys saw at the beginning of this video, towards the end, the team basically said, hey, we got to cut this off, right? Hard rap. Okay. Kamala Harris has essentially filibustered her way through the whole interview without answering any questions. And that's it, right? So again, you can clearly see that the strategy was to come in and to overtalk Bret Baier, to not answer any questions, to filibuster, to go on Trump deranged rants in which she was clearly losing her mind, right? She was melting down over Bret Baier, not allowing her to filibuster, to not answer the question, to go off on tangents against Trump. And they were trying to run out the clock. That's what they were doing, right? That was the whole point. Let's just do it to say that we did it. Oh, well, Kamala did the interview. You can't say anything about it. You can't criticize her anymore. And that's what the strategy was, right? The strategy was not to come in and to have a real conversation and to actually, engage with her record and whether or not she takes any responsibility for what happened during her administration, right? That's what happened, right? It was obvious. And I honestly think that this is bad, right? This is really bad for Kamala Harris. She is the one that appears to be mentally unstable. She's the one that appears to not be able to handle pressure when she's being pressed on her record. And some of the things that she said before in the past, some of the things that she's done before in the past, she can't handle it. She can't take it. She loses her mind, right? She does exactly what she claims that Trump does, right? She's the exact type of person that she claims that Trump is, except Trump is much better at handling the heat and the pressure that comes with tough questions. He's been doing that for the past 8 years straight. Kamala Harris does one hard interview, one tough interview. She doesn't answer any questions whatsoever and loses her mind because Bret Baier is not allowing her to filibuster her way through the interview. And the crazy part is that Bret Baier was stuck between a rock and a hard place because as a man, there was only so much he could do to stop her from filibustering, right? I mean, Bret Baier, if he had been as hard as he should have been on her for essentially trying to not answer any questions and to run out the clock, they would have said, oh, well, Bret Baier is mansplaining and he's talking over a woman and yada, yada, yada. He was actually very respectful towards her, even though she was very disrespectful towards him throughout the whole interview. Again, considering how she was definitely not trying to answer any of his questions. This is embarrassing. It really is. This is way worse than I thought it would be. Way worse. Now, I didn't think that Bret Baier would be soft on Kamala like a lot of people thought. I just didn't think that Kamala would be this bad. I didn't think that she would melt down this much. A lot of these questions, again, they're not that hard to answer. All Kamala has to do is just be honest. Just say, hey, I made a mistake. No, I don't agree with what we did initially. What we did was wrong. But I learned from those mistakes. And this is why you should trust me moving forward, is because I personally know that what we did wasn't good. That the things that we advocated for were from a place of good intentions, right? But it just didn't work. And because of that, now I know. And now I'm ready to take on this issue. That's all she has to say. Just admit that you were wrong, okay? Just do it. That's all you got to do. I'm telling you, it would humanize her. But again, she should not take my advice, right? Do not take my advice, because if Kamala Harris actually took my advice, she wouldn't have these types of meltdowns, right? She would actually appear as a competent leader that learns from her mistakes. Yeah, we learned from the mistake. No, I didn't agree with what Joe Biden did. No, it was wrong. I mean, we are now fixing these things, right? As you can see, we've put back into place some of these executive orders. So clearly we're not afraid to go back and to reverse some of the things that we got wrong. And we're moving forward from there. And hopefully we can come together in Congress and actually solve the border crisis by shutting down the border, okay, and having a legal immigration system that rewards people who want to come over to the country legally, right? Again, it's not that hard, man, right? Like, it's not that hard. But again, what you're seeing here is a narcissistic politician who cannot have any humility, right? Who cannot have a moment of just being honest. Just get out of the fake bullshit, right? Just humanize yourself, right? Just be an effing human for 1 second and just admit that, hey, we were wrong. But see, she can't do it. She can't do it because she's a robot. She's a robot, and all she does is that she reads a script, she sticks to talking points, and she cannot do anything other than that, right? Anything other than that, anything other than the talking points, she can't do it. She can't do it. She cannot think for herself, because a thinking person will realize by now, hey, this is not working. Let's actually try something different. Let's try to actually connect with people on a real level, right? Let's stop with all the fakeness and really sit down and say, you know what? This is what we got right. This is what we got wrong. And here's how we're going to fix it moving forward. That's all she has to do. That's all she has to do. But instead, she just takes absolutely no responsibility for anything. When There are things that are clearly her fault. It is clearly your fault what happened at the border, and you take no responsibility for it. It's everybody else's fault. It's Congress's fault. It's Trump's fault. It's everybody's fault except yours. You are the border czar. You made all these crazy claims, these wild claims about wanting to decriminalize illegal immigration, wanting to give sex change operations to illegals. You made these claims. She can't even tell you why she made them. She can't even tell you why she changed her position. The only thing she can tell you is that, well, but Trump, right? But Trump. Again, is yo, this interview was a disaster, man. Wow, that was way worse than I thought it would be. Again, my expectations for Kamala Harris, again, was very low. But I mean, this is worse, way worse than I could imagine. Okay, what she showed there was not strength. What she showed there was weakness. Okay, she showed that she's a weak, mediocre politician who's a robot. Okay, she's mindless. She doesn't have the ability to think for herself, and she belongs nowhere near that White House, right? It is a damn shame that she's even vice president of this country right now. This country should be ashamed. Should be ashamed of themselves. We should be ashamed of ourselves for allowing somebody like her to even get close to the office of President of the United States. She's one heartbeat away from being commander in chief, and this country should be ashamed to even let her get close to that office. So you can see why her team essentially rage quit this interview, especially when they were getting to the topic of Israel and foreign policy. They really didn't want her talking about that. So yeah, they rage quit. They tried to run out the clock, and yeah, this was a disaster. This was an epic disaster. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.